What do you think usually comes to the minds of law enforcement agents when you look so nervous during a traffic stop? Of course, you would make them look at you suspiciously. Let us dive right into this heartwarming story. But before we proceed with this, please like, share, and hit the subscribe button to support this channel. Thank you. Officer Johnson had been on the force for over a decade. A seasoned veteran, he had seen it all. From high-speed chases to domestic disputes, Officer Johnson had handled every situation with professionalism and poise. But on this particular evening, he was about to encounter something that would leave him speechless. As he cruised down the highway in his patrol car, Officer Johnson noticed a suspicious van driving erratically. The van's tires were worn, and its taillights were busted. Officer Johnson's instincts kicked in, and he flipped on his sirens, pulling the van over to the side of the road. The driver, a disheveled man in his mid-30s, stepped out of the van. Officer Johnson approached him, hand resting on his gun. "License and registration, please," Officer Johnson said firmly. The man fumbled through his pockets, producing a worn wallet and a crumpled registration. Officer Johnson took them, eyeing the man's nervous demeanor. "What's your name?" Officer Johnson asked. I am Dave," the man stuttered. Officer Johnson radioed for backup, his eyes scanning the surrounding area. That's when he noticed something strange. The van's side door was slightly ajar. Officer Johnson's gut told him something was off. "Dave, can you step away from the van?" Officer Johnson ordered. Dave hesitated, then slowly backed away. Officer Johnson cautiously approached the van, his gun drawn. He pushed open the side door, and a faint cry echoed out. Officer Johnson's heart skipped a beat. He peered into the van, and what he saw left him speechless. A young girl, no more than 10 years old, was huddled in the corner, her eyes wide with fear. She was surrounded by stacks of crates and boxes, filled with food, water, and medical supplies. Suddenly, Dave rushed forward, panic etched on his face. "Please, officer." "You don't understand," he exclaimed. Officer Johnson raised his gun, warning Dave, "Step back." But as he looked into the van, he saw something that gave him pause. The girl was holding a small, handmade sign that read, "Please help us." Officer Johnson's expression softened. He lowered his gun, his mind racing with questions. Who was this girl? What was she doing in the van? And why was Dave so desperate to keep her hidden? "Dave, what's going on here?" Officer Johnson asked, his voice firm but gentle. Dave took a deep breath, his eyes welling up with tears. "Her name is Sophia," he began. "She's my niece. Her parents were killed in a natural disaster, and I've been taking care of her ever since." Officer Johnson's expression turned sympathetic. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said. Dave continued, his voice cracking. "But it's not just that. Sophia has a rare medical condition. She needs constant treatment, and I've been struggling to make ends meet. I was driving her to a hospital in the next town, but I got lost." Officer Johnson's eyes widened as the pieces fell into place. The crates and boxes in the van were supplies for Sophia's treatment. Dave wasn't a kidnapper, he was a desperate uncle trying to save his niece's life. Without hesitation, Officer Johnson holstered his gun and helped Sophia out of the van. He radioed for an ambulance, and soon, paramedics arrived to take Sophia to the hospital. As they waited, Officer Johnson turned to Dave, his expression stern but kind. "Dave, I'm not going to arrest you. But you need to promise me you'll get help. You can't do this alone." Dave nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you, officer. I promise." The ambulance took Sophia to the hospital, where she received the treatment she needed. Dave was given resources to help him care for Sophia, and Officer Johnson made sure to check in on them regularly. As Officer Johnson watched Sophia and Dave reunite at the hospital, he felt a sense of pride and purpose. He had made a difference in their lives, and that's what being a police officer was all about. The incident had left Officer Johnson speechless, but it had also reminded him of the power of compassion and kindness. He returned to his patrol car, feeling grateful for the unexpected turn of events. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of an incredible journey. As the days went by, Officer Johnson found himself thinking about Sophia and Dave more often. He had grown attached to them and wanted to ensure they were doing well. One evening, he decided to pay them a visit. Officer Johnson arrived at the hospital, where Sophia was still undergoing treatment. He was greeted by Dave, who looked more relaxed than before. "Officer Johnson." "It's great to see you," Dave said, shaking Officer Johnson's hand. Officer Johnson smiled. "Please, call me Mike." "How's Sophia doing?" Dave's face lit up. "She's doing great, thanks to you. The doctors say she's responding well to the treatment." Officer Johnson's eyes welled up with tears. "That's amazing news, Dave. I'm so happy for you both." As they talked, Sophia was wheeled out of her room, looking pale but smiling. "Officer," she exclaimed, her eyes sparkling. Officer Johnson's heart melted. He knelt beside Sophia's wheelchair, taking her hand. "Hey, kiddo. How are you feeling?" Sophia's smile faltered for a moment before she replied, "I'm feeling better, thanks to you, officer." "Sophia, you can call me Officer Mike, okay?" Officer Johnson's eyes met Dave's, and he saw gratitude and admiration there. In that moment, Officer Johnson knew he had made a real difference in their lives. Over the next few weeks, Officer Johnson visited Sophia and Dave regularly. He watched Sophia's health improve, and he saw Dave's stress and worry slowly fade away. One evening, as Officer Johnson was leaving the hospital, Dave approached him. "Mike, can I talk to you for a minute?" Dave asked, his voice low and serious. Officer Johnson nodded, curious. "What's on your mind, Dave?" Dave took a deep breath. "I want to thank you again for everything you've done for us. You've given us a second chance, and we'll never forget it." Officer Johnson smiled, feeling a sense of pride and fulfillment. "You're welcome, Dave. That's what being a police officer is all about." Dave's eyes locked onto Officer Johnson's. "I want to ask you something, Mike. Would you be willing to be a part of Sophia's life? She's grown attached to you, and I think it would be great for her to have a positive male role model." Officer Johnson's heart swelled with emotion. He thought about his own childhood, about the struggles he had faced, and about the positive influences that had helped shape him into the person he was today. He looked at Dave, then at Sophia, who was watching them with curious eyes. Officer Johnson nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'd be honored, Dave." From that day on, Officer Johnson became a regular part of Sophia's life. He visited her at the hospital, took her on outings, and even helped Dave with her care. Sophia thrived under Officer Johnson's attention, and her health began to improve dramatically. As the months passed, Officer Johnson found himself growing more and more attached to Sophia. He began to see her as a surrogate daughter, and he felt a deep sense of responsibility towards her. One day, Dave approached Officer Johnson with a nervous look on his face. "Mike, I have something important to talk to you about," he said. Officer Johnson's instincts kicked in, and he felt a sense of trepidation. "What is it, Dave?" he asked. Dave took a deep breath. "I've been offered a job in another state, Mike. It's a great opportunity for me, but it means I'll have to leave Sophia behind." Officer Johnson's eyes widened in shock. He had never considered the possibility of Dave leaving Sophia. "What about Sophia?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Dave's eyes welled up with tears. "I know it's a lot to ask, Mike, but I was wondering if you would be willing to take care of Sophia. You're the only person I trust to give her the care and love she needs." Officer Johnson's heart swelled with emotion. He thought about his own life, about his career as a police officer, and about the sacrifices he would have to make to care for Sophia. He nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do it, Dave. I'll take care of Sophia." Dave's face broke out into a smile, and he hugged Officer Johnson tightly. "Thank you, Mike. Thank you for giving Sophia a second chance at life." As Officer Johnson hugged Dave back, he felt a sense of purpose and meaning that he had never felt before. He knew that his life was about to change in ways he never could have imagined, but he was ready. He was ready to take on the challenge of caring for Sophia, and he was ready to see where this new journey would take him. Officer Johnson is a widower. His wife, Sarah, passed away 5 years ago after a long battle with cancer. They had 2 children together, a son named Alex and a daughter named Emily. Alex is now 19 and in college, while Emily is 16 and in high school. After his wife's passing, Officer Johnson threw himself into his work to cope with the grief. He became a dedicated and respected member of the police force, but his personal life suffered. He struggled to balance his job with raising his children, often relying on his sister-in-law, Rachel, to help with childcare. As the children grew older, they became more independent, and Officer Johnson found himself with more time on his hands. He began to feel a sense of emptiness, realizing that he had devoted so much time to his job that he had neglected his personal life. When Sophia enters his life, Officer Johnson is drawn to her vulnerability and resilience. He sees an opportunity to make a difference in her life and to fill the void left by his wife's passing. As the days turned into weeks, Officer Johnson and Sophia grew closer and closer. They became an inseparable duo, with Officer Johnson attending every one of Sophia's doctor's appointments and Sophia accompanying Officer Johnson on every one of his police calls. But just as things were starting to look up, disaster struck. One fateful night, as Officer Johnson and Sophia were driving home from a particularly grueling doctor's appointment, their car was broadsided by a speeding truck. The impact was immense, and Officer Johnson's car crumpled like a tin can. Officer Johnson was knocked unconscious, and Sophia was left screaming in the wreckage. As the paramedics rushed to the scene, Sophia's cries grew louder and more desperate. She was trapped, pinned beneath the twisted metal of the car, and she couldn't move. Officer Johnson, still dazed from the crash, struggled to free himself from the wreckage. He could hear Sophia's cries, and he knew he had to act fast. With a Herculean effort, Officer Johnson managed to pry himself loose from the car. He stumbled towards Sophia, his heart racing with fear. As he reached her side, he saw that she was trapped beneath a heavy piece of metal. Officer Johnson knew he had to lift it, but he also knew it was too heavy for him to lift alone. Just as he was about to give up, Officer Johnson felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through his veins. He gritted his teeth, summoned every last ounce of strength he possessed, and heaved the metal off Sophia's chest. Sophia gasped, her eyes fluttering open as she took a deep breath. Officer Johnson cradled her in his arms, tears of relief streaming down his face. As the paramedics rushed towards them, Officer Johnson whispered a single phrase into Sophia's ear, "I'll never let you go." And as Sophia's eyes locked onto Officer Johnson's, she smiled weakly, knowing that she had finally found a true home, and a true father, in the unlikeliest of places. Thank you for watching till the end. Please, give this video a like, share and subscribe for more inspiring stories.